Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to Pre-Shift. Normally, TJ is introducing me, and he is on vacation this week, so I will introduce myself. I'm Ron Edwards, Director of Wine Education for Winebow and a Master Sommelier. And Pre-Shift is the usual exploration of things that we should be thinking about in the hospitality trade and in the service trade in general. And today's topic is a difficult one and a bit of a hot button for a lot of people because people have different views of it depending on where they stand, but it's arrogance versus boldness. And this is that. So we're just going to explore this line in the sand. And I really believe that it's kind of a narrow line in a lot of ways um, that divides the idea of a bold attempt to expand the norms in the beverage program world and arrogance in regarding to expanding the norms in the beverage world. I think they both have the same goal, um, but they don't turn out the same. So I'd love for you to invest some of your own thoughts into the moments in your career when you found yourself on either side or both sides of this line. Love to hear that feedback in the Q&A. I'm not going to manage the chat window, but I will manage the Q&A. And because TJ is not here to bounce thoughts off of, it would be really awesome if you were bouncing thoughts back to me out there in the audience. My intention is also to open up about some real life moments in my career that I would describe on each side of this line. Moments I would describe as arrogance and moments I would describe as bold choices. And so why don't we get started? All right. So I am bold, or am I arrogant? And the city is burning behind me and I don't care because my wishes have been met. There is a big difference here. You know, the problem with these two remarkably similar outcomes, meaning a creative or pushing the boundaries beverage program, or a beverage program that really offers the opportunity to explore, that's going to happen from both of these perspectives and both of these ideas of either being bold or being arrogant. They both offer unique options. They will both offer small and artisan producers. They will both demonstrate an individual style that is coming through that's the hand of the builder, right? And they'll both limit or eliminate large and well-known brands. So the result, what you get as the consumer when you sit down and you're a guest in this restaurant or this hotel, or you're walking through this retail space, looks a lot of the same. So the fine line is there. So I ask you as the audience, you know, what makes one of these programs arrogant and the other beverage program bold? So think about that for a second. If you have an immediate response, throw it in there. So if the outcome looks the same, unique options, small artisan producers, individual style, and maybe the complete elimination or at least the limiting of large well-known brands, what makes one arrogant and one bold? Think about that for a second. Throw some things in the chat window if you like. I'm sorry, the Q&A. That'd be really great. I'm going to throw my idea here because I think this picture represents it. I think when you boil it down, the difference between arrogance and boldness is the heart behind the choices that you made. Are you living in the world that the guest experience and their happiness is at the center of your decision-making process? In which case you're probably on the bold side of the line. Or deep down, are your decisions actually just about your view of what is good wine or spirits or beer and what is interesting, regardless of what the customer base might be telling you otherwise? If your heart is with them, then you're going to make decisions that are perceived by them far better than if your heart is actually with you and about your desire to push the envelope, your desire to remove certain choices from their option list. You know, is the guest lack of comfort secondary to your self-expression? And how big is the gap? That's also a real telltale moment. If you search your soul and ask yourself that question, you're going to find yourself on one side or the other of that. And if in the end, the guest comfort is secondary to your desire to be creative, then you're moving on the other side of the line. You might not be all the way on the extreme of arrogance, but you're past boldness at that point. How much do you desire to add comfort to the guest decision making, right? So if you have a great desire to offer comfort to your guest, to the buyer of what you're offering, then you are definitely operating on the bold side, because you're going to make decisions that are relative to the guest need, to the retail customer need, to your client's need. And when you make those kind of decisions, they usually are perceived really, really well. So, where do we start with that? If anybody has feedback, this is a great time to throw it in there. And we move into here. So, what gives me the right as to call all of us out on this? Is this, I don't want to be in preacher mode. I want to be in compatriot mode, I suppose. And I believe that the reason I have the right to talk about this is I own my own mistakes and my own successes in this area. And I want to share some of those with you as practical applications, because I think it might draw out some indications in your own world of how you might have fallen into one side or the other, maybe even unintentionally fallen into the side of arrogance. I can tell you on my part, while I look back, and hindsight's always 2020 is the famous saying, I can look back now and say, wow, that was an arrogant decision on my part, because I have the benefit of time and age and experience and hopefully a little bit of wisdom that comes along with that. So I just bring up a really easy one, the beginnings of arrogance, that alarm that goes off in your head and actually in your speech pattern. When you catch yourself in a moment like this, I was in at Five Lakes Grill in my initial general manager's day. I had passed the initial sommelier introductory course. I don't think I had actually passed the advanced sommelier course at that point. So some folks came in and they were collectors and they wanted to bring some of their own wine. And it was a party of, I don't know, 10 or something like that. So we set them off in a separate side of the dining room. And the wife of the person that brought the wine looked up at me and said, I would like some ice for my Chardonnay. And in my head, I was appalled. Why in the world would you put ice in your Kistler Chardonnay? I mean, that's just crazy. It's one of the great Chardonnays of the world. Why are you putting ice in it? And kind of looked down my nose mentally at this woman, which is so bad, so arrogant of me. It's her wine. It wasn't served at the temperature she likes it. And so why do I care if she puts ice in it? Shouldn't she be perfectly within her rights to put ice in her wine if that's what makes her happy? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And as I got older and more experienced and came to the conclusion that, no matter how I feel about this, ice in your Chardonnay or pick your favorite hot button in the world of hospitality and wine service, I'm not the one that's being asked to consume it. So why is it bothering me? And as I got older, I got to the point where I started dropping an ice cube or two in wines occasionally, because I would go to a restaurant and the wines are coming off the back bar and they're just too hot. And I'm like, hey, bring me a few ice cubes, please. And people would look at me like I had three eyes because I put ice in my red wine. And the point was, you have bad storage, so you're forcing me into this situation. So we just shouldn't get to a place where we're judging somebody else's likes and dislikes as professionals in the wine and spirits and beer trade. And my sensibilities about what the proper way to serve something is never in direct correlation with the guest happiness, because the guest happiness is based on their own experience and what they think is proper and what they're comfortable with. And I just need to be okay with that. So that was a moment that I caught myself, especially retrospectively. And it wasn't long after that thought process that I realized, wow, that has to go away. I can't think like that anymore. Along the same lines, in that same period of my career, I feel like looking back now that I exhibited arrogance when I thought I needed a big wine list, a long wine list, to be considered a good wine list. And I just completely disagree with that now. I think the most difficult and interesting wine lists to write are those well under 100 choices. I think it's fascinating to try and write a really, really good wine list with 50 choices. Only expert customers, only clients that either collect or they're avid wine consumers or they're well-traveled and well-dined are benefited by large lists unless they have a lot of help. So big lists, that over 100 choices into the 300 and more when somebody drops the tome of the wine list on your table, boom. And that's really exciting for a wine geek like me, except that now my wife gets ignored for 20 minutes while I page through it. Big lists need big help and lots of hands-on, knowledgeable service to actually be good lists. Just because you have a collection of amazing wines doesn't make it a good wine list, because it has to be functional for the customer sitting in your seats. Just because you have a giant retail store doesn't make it a great selection of wines, unless the person coming in to shop has easy access to find exactly what they're looking for without feeling inept. I think it's arrogant to build big lists unless you build all the support necessary, education, sommelier service, all the other necessary things to support a big list. When this one's, and I'm gonna call a spade at this point. When I absolutely refused for years to put Grey Goose vodka on my back bar, because it was all marketing. In my opinion, it was all marketing with little point of difference between the 9 other options that I already had, which was just plain stubborn and arrogant and foolish on my part, because Grey Goose was all the rage, which meant that everybody that walked up and asked for a Grey Goose and soda, I was disappointing just because of my own view, just because I felt like, you know, I just have this thing about odorless, colorless, flavorless beverages that are more expensive than other odorless, flavorless, colorless beverages. It's a personal thing. It shouldn't be laid on the rest of the consumer base. Yes, it's true. You cannot carry everything. Eventually, you have to say, no, I don't need another whatever, vodka, Chardonnay, Pinot Grigio, Cabernet Sauvignon, gin, tequila, whatever it is, depending on your business. But why was it so important to me that I not serve the most popular vodka at the time? Arrogance. That's all it was. Just stubborn arrogance. It would have been an easy sell, and I just turned it down. Just dumb. Just dumb. So, what situations in your past or maybe in your present are some of these stories maybe relating to, or some of this idea of arrogance? Are we pointing to anything that you're doing right now, or things you've done in the past that you were like, hey, I'm not doing that anymore because I realize now that wasn't really about the customer. That wasn't really about the guest. And if you got anything, share it with me. I'm going to move on to positive, because positive is so much more fun than negative. So bold, fairly bold picture there, and fun picture too, I might add. So I'm going to share a couple of experiences of boldness where I feel like I may have walked up to the line a few times in this process, but I never stepped over it into arrogance, because in the end, I was keeping the guest experience in mind, and I had the right other support mechanisms involved to be able to be bold without being alienating. And I'm going to bring up one that I bring up fairly often, because this is sort of this definitely qualifies as bold and walked right up to the line of arrogance. And I'm sure that at moments in time, maybe it was on the other side, but in the end, the retrospective judgment of this action, I feel like, was on the bold side, not on the arrogant side. And that was when I worked at Tapawingo, which was one of the Midwest's greatest restaurants for a very long time. I made a conscious choice not to serve Pinot Grigio by the glass from 2002 to 2005 in the Midwest. in an icon restaurant. That's a bold choice because Pinot Grigio was no less popular then than it is now. As a matter of fact, it may have even been more popular at that point. It was the emergence of Santa Margarita. It was all the rage. What I chose to serve instead was Gruner Veltliner from Kremtal Krimstal most of the time, Domaine Vacau and things like that. And it was a conscious choice on my part to introduce a new grape and a new region to people that I knew would like it because of what they're asking me for when they say Pinot Grigio. I know they're asking for Pinot Grigio, but they're also saying, I will like unoaked, crisp, refreshing white wine from Europe. And Pinot Grigio, Albarino, and a few other things definitely qualify. They're also saying it can't be too aromatic, and I'm not really looking for that green pop of Sauvignon Blanc. I want something that's refreshing, dry, crisp, but not too much personality. So the Gruner Veltliners I chose were the less expressive versions, not the big, spicy, powerful Schmag and things like that. And I put it on by the glass at a reasonable price. How did that work out? It worked out great, actually, because I made sure that the whole staff knew why it was done. I made sure that any guest who was in the least bit hesitant, I'd offer them a taste to see where it would go. I think I had 2 people in 3 years tell me, nope, can't drink that. And this restaurant had a tasting menu, a 5-course tasting menu every day of the week that it was open in the summertime, where I could put Gruner Veltliner from the glass pour list with a dish, because the chef made a lot of dishes that were really great with Gruner Veltliner. And I could introduce the greater populace in context of great food and wine pairing to the grape and let them experience it in the right context. And in addition to all of that, because Tapawingo was a restaurant with a focal point of high-end dining, we hosted a more knowledgeable and well-traveled crowd than just an average restaurant around the country. That gave me a guest pool that was more likely to be experimental and more likely to explore. In addition to that, this was on the other side of the emergence curve. It was already a normal glass pour in Chicago and New York and San Francisco. So I wasn't asking people to join me in a first adopter syndrome. This wine had been around. So people who have traveled had seen it, even if they hadn't tried it. So those were the reasons that I felt like, in retrospect and at the time, while it was a bold choice, it wasn't beyond bold and into, I just hate Pinot Grigio, I don't want to sell it anymore. It wasn't about that at all. All right. So a second example of bold, in my opinion, also in Northern Michigan. That's where I was from. So I worked as a consultant for a Northern Michigan Mediterranean themed restaurant. So it kind of combined the idea of the Great Lakes and Mediterranean cuisine. And so we had a focal point on Mediterranean style wines, and they could be from somewhere other than the Mediterranean, but they needed to sort of come from a Mediterranean grape, etc. Now, Chardonnay is not a Mediterranean grape, but Chardonnay is a grape that is well known to all people. So who drink wine. So while I wanted in my heart to do nothing but Mediterranean, I knew that would be crossing the line into arrogance, because just to assume that I could force the everyday average white wine consumer away from their favorite grape just because it didn't fit the theme of the restaurant was a really bad idea. So I didn't do that. But what I did instead was I focused on the theme of the restaurant, and my most affordable by the glass Chardonnay was a really well-made Chardonnay with oak influence from Northern Michigan. So they got their Chardonnay, but we got to stick with our Northern Michigan influence. The most expensive Chardonnay on the menu was Morgan Chardonnay, Santa Lucia Highlands, which is it definitely shows the oak, and it's big and it's round and it fits that California Chardonnay drinker profile. And it was at the time, this is several years ago, at the time it was like $14 a glass. We got a really good deal on it, and I was able to sell it like that. And in the middle at $12, so the Northern Michigan Chardonnay was 10, the Chardonnay from Santa Lucia Highlands was 14, and right in the middle, I threw the purely Mediterranean wine. That I believe Chardonnay drinkers can and do like, and I proved it over and over again in that restaurant, Cigales Santorini Assyrtiko. So that was $12. So we weren't making the world's greatest profit margin on the Cigales, but it was a bridge to introduce people into Mediterranean grape varietals without alienating them because they look down at the wine list and see nothing they recognize. Because if you fill a wine list with nothing but Mediterranean wines and their grape varietals, you're eliminating 4 or so of the top 5 grape varieties that people recognize in America, and that's really hard for them. So Laura's got a great comment, it looks like. So let me read it to everybody. I think it is important to consider the guest from step 1. Get to know a tiny bit about how they've got to your business and then bounce off of them. They usually let you know quickly how bold you can be. If you gain their trust, you can move a guest toward wines that you know fit the food pairing best. And if you can't, at least you can please them by simply giving them what they've requested. Absolutely. The idea, I often ask this, Laura, of staff when I'm trying to introduce them to a new wine. And I bring up the idea that I brought up a few minutes ago of when someone asks you for Pinot Grigio, what are they saying? And there's like some options there, right? But the first option is, I would like a glass of Pinot Grigio. Thank you. No adulterations. Don't suggest anything else, right? It does say to you what box they live in for likes and dislikes, which to Laura's point gives you an opportunity, if played well, to expand them. And so I use that, Laura, in the way I write the list too. So if you're out there and you write your wine programs by region only, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as the people understand where their favorite wines come from. If you write your beverage program, now it's especially difficult in retail, right? Because you can guarantee, if you set up your retail space by region only, that anything that isn't from the most well-known regions will languish and not sell, right? And yes, Laura, don't go straight to all sauce, but start off something easy is a good point. Agree with them that their desire, I think what you're coming here with, Laura, is that we need to meet them where they are, agree that their choice is a good option. Yeah, we have Pinot Grigio, or yeah, we have Chardonnay, and I think you'll like it. If you want to explore, I have some other suggestions for you. That's a whole different experience than, no, I'm sorry, I won't sell you a glass of Pinot Grigio. That's lame. You know, that's the attitude that comes across if you have like no Pinot Grigios and no Chardonnays, and everything on your wine program or in your retail store is like the antithesis of normal by their consideration. So to go down that path a little bit and give you an idea of how I dealt with that, I always write my beverage programs now by style. And so I realize that if I want somebody to drink Sauvignon Blanc from Südsteiermark, then I need to put that Sauvignon Blanc next to Sauvignon Blanc from everywhere else, not in a Austria section where nobody else but me is going to know that Sauvignon Blanc exists when they walk in my dining room. So all of my beverage programs moved to stylistic about midway through my career. So that's also the beauty of a smaller beverage program, 100 wines, and you put them in by style. You can do, light crisp whites, medium white whites, rich bold whites, and then move on from there. And so if you want to sell, like we did, Grenache Blanc from California and Grenache Blanc dominated wines from Châteauneuf-du-Pape, where do you put those? You put them next to Chardonnay. And then you order those wines in weight. So the lighter wines are at the top and the heavier, richer wines are at the bottom. And if you're trying to, move people into new areas, offer them really good value in the wines they've never heard of, and not as much value or no value in the wines they have heard of. I'm not talking about punishing them for addictions, but they know what their normal Chardonnay, Pinot Grigio, et cetera, costs. And you don't need to offer a deal on that because they're going to buy it anyway. But if you want to do what we did, which was sell Pinot Grigio from Slovenia instead of Alto Adige, then that's great. Put it in there, label it as Pinot Grigio because that's all they're really looking for, and keep it in the right price range and make the producer's name easy. Like if it was a Slovenian producer with a really difficult name to pronounce, then I'm like, no, I can't do that for Pinot Grigio. But the producer's name was Pullus, Pullus, piece of cake to pronounce in English. Even if that's not how it sounds in Slovenia, it's easy for us here. Right in that same section, so you got Pinot Grigio sitting next to Pinot Blanc from Michigan, sitting next to Albarino, sitting next to Treixadura. Like, well, that's crazy to serve a Treixadura by the glass. Not really, because the name of the producer was Flower and Bee, and it was sitting right in that same category of wines where everybody loved them. And when I put that wine on the menu, we sold as much Treixadura as we did, you know, most anything else in that category. We sold more Pinot Grigio, but we sold plenty of Treixadura by the glass to make it so that it was a viable glass pour option instead of only by the bottle, which meant it would guarantee to get no attention. So where did I put Assyrtiko? I put Assyrtiko right next to Chablis. So we had, you know, Santorini, Chablis, and then it went into other lighter Chardonnays, and then into, you know, middle Burgundy, because, you know, not having those on a menu means you're throwing money out the door that you're not going to collect, because if you like Chardonnay, then you should, somebody's going to order Burgundy and spend a fair amount of money on it. And then into the higher tier California Chardonnays. Even though they didn't work with Mediterranean concept, they worked with our guests. Our guests wanted to see those wines. It made them comfortable to see those wines, which gave me an opportunity to expand them something else. Like perhaps maybe if they like Chablis, I'll back them up a little bit. And we had Domaine Huet Vouvray Sec, which is absolutely phenomenal wine. But if all you've ever had in your life is sweet Vouvray and you like dry whites, then you need an introduction there. So there's also that. The other thing that you really want to do in your design of your wine program, per the same recommendation of Madeline Truffant, is make sure your list tells them what grape variety it is, even if they don't know that grape variety, just because that's how we latch onto things here in America. And so Laura also brought a comment, which I greatly appreciate, Laura, because you're speaking for everybody else, but don't think that you're speaking too much. I think it's great. And she says, I have oversold in that way in the past, meaning going straight to something difficult instead of starting comfortable and come off too arrogant, to be honest. And I think that's what you mean. And if that's not, let me know. But, and, you know, it's kind of coincidental. Like, Laura, I think if you and I were having a conversation, you say, I went to the table with what I thought was the right intention, but looking back on it, I know I made a mistake. And that's kind of how I feel about a lot of these situations that I'm discussing today. And so this is a great open forum at the moment. If you want to add any comments, this is the time. I'm to the end of my commentary on this concept, and I'm ready to introduce the next topic, unless there are comments from the crowd. So now's a good time. All right. So next pre-shift is getting the most engagement out of pre-shift, as in the real world, getting the most engagement out of pre-shift in your own dining rooms or in your own hotels, or even the pre-shift that some of our retailers have to get ready for the day to entertain guests or customers and talk about what's important to the retailer and the customer. So David types in, is it reasonable not to want to carry 3 white Zinfandels? Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable, David. I think it would be unreasonable in a market still drinking white Zinfandel to eliminate it from your beverage program and spend all this time trying to convince them to drink, you know, Vouvray, demi-sec, or, you know, sweeter styles of Riesling, because, you know, per Madeline Truffant's comment, you know, that's what some people just really like, right? And, you know, in all honesty, selling Beringer White Zinfandel and a lot of it over the course of time got me access to their entire library of wines, which meant at one point I had like 25-year vertical of Beringer Cabernets. So it can have its benefits. Having 3 of them suggests that it's important to you and you want to sell them. Having 1 of them says that it's important to you that the guests have the option. And there's a big difference there. I was having this discussion with my colleague, Sonia Moore, yesterday about the concept that 1 is nothing. And I've said that in one of these other webinars, is that if you want to guarantee that something that you're experimenting with won't work, have 1 on the list. If you want to guarantee that your people don't like rosé, sell 1. In the case of White Zinfandel, putting it there says, I hear you people. I got you. I'm okay with this, because chances are they're not going to order any other kind of wine. And that means they're going to alternate to something else. Now, if they order a cocktail, good for you. If they order a beer, good for you. But if they move to iced tea instead, that's not good for you. So just remember that White Zinfandel was essentially the gateway drug to many of your expensive Cabernet and Chardonnay drinkers today. They called it Matousse Rosé back in the day. It was a different version of not the same grape, but the same concept. Blush, off dry to noticeably sweet pink wines were the entry point for the majority of our baby boomers and the early 60s drinking crowd right now. So don't be too harsh on that. It has a definite purpose. And honestly, if you've ever had a really good chicken salad with like whole grapes and pecans and that kind of chicken salad with a glass of White Zinfandel, it's pretty fabulous together. So everything has a place, right? Thanks for the question, David. I loved it. So I look forward, unless there are other questions, I look forward to joining you on the 27th of July at 11 a.m. And we should be having a great time. Also look for an announcement in your email inbox for our Bordeaux show, which TJ will host on his next opportunity. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your Tuesday.